Hey guys, tonight we drift back to a time when the gentle slap of water against wooden hulls wasn't the rhythm of a sleepy harbor. It was the soundtrack of pigs. Yup, pigs, floating on boats in canals. You're easing through 1600s Amsterdam now, and what greets you isn't the faint scent of tulips or old wooden beams, but something far earthier, far muskier. Something porcine. You're about to spend the night aboard one of the strangest innovations in urban farming history, the Dutch pig barge. You trudge along a fogged-over canal, the mist low and the lanterns faint. The air is thick with dampness and something else, a meaty tang that clings to the throat. You hear it before you see it. The low grunts of pigs, the shuffling of hooves on wet planks, the splash of waste into brackish water. Welcome aboard the Floating Pig Palace. Glamorous, huh? You probably won't survive this, at least not with your nose unoffended, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? I always love seeing who's out there quietly dozing off to history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're gently stepping onto a flat-bottomed wooden barge, tethered to the edge of the Herengracht. The boards creak under your feet, and the whole thing gives slightly as you move. Pigs snuffle towards you as if expecting breakfast, or maybe just bored enough to investigate your existence. Their breath rises in little clouds in the cold morning air. You smell damp hay, old wood, and yeah, a hint of fermented pig slop. You're not the first to grimace. It's 1662. Amsterdam is booming, swollen with trade, ships, sugar, spices, and bodies. The city is choking on its own success. Space is scarce, rent is ludicrous, and the canals are doing overtime. Commerce, sewage, and now, apparently, livestock storage. It's urban innovation in the most unflattering form. Historians still argue whether this idea was born of necessity or sheer Dutch stubbornness. After all, the Netherlands is famous for fighting water with water. Why not float your food? Real estate is expensive and pigs are valuable. But pigs are also loud, messy, and produce a lot more than just bacon. So instead of cluttering land space with muddy pens, someone had the bright idea to build a pigsty on a barge. Just float the stink offshore. You pass a yawning bargekeeper, boots sloshing through straw and slop. He offers you a nod, then returns to ladling out some dubious grain mix into a trough. The pigs erupt in squeals, crowding and slapping against each other in a jostling mass of bristles and flesh. They're hungry, sure, but this noise, this chaos, it happens every day. And somehow the neighbors don't always love it. The barge is more elaborate than you'd think. These aren't just pigs tossed on a boat. There's structure here. Slatted floors for drainage, curved roofing to fend off rain, little storage nooks for feed, and rudimentary waste chutes that, well, you're better off not investigating too closely. You peek through a hatch and glimpse barrels of pickled cabbage for the pigs. Not you. And even a handwritten log of feed amounts and growth rates. You're standing in the floating embodiment of bureaucratic agriculture. As the city wakes around you, you catch glimpses of daily life on the water. A child throws breadcrumbs to ducks from a nearby bridge. A baker opens a shutter and dumps out old ash from his oven. And all the while the pigs slurp and snort, completely indifferent to the civilization they're technically part of. You imagine trying to sleep next to this barge. Some people had to. Complaints to the city council roll in. Herr van de Kerkhof is keeping swine too close to respectable dwellings, one says. Another calls the pig barges symphonies of sewage. But until formal regulation kicks in, they float onward, bobbing gently on the city's veins. One fringe theory claims some floating pig palaces were converted fishing boats, repurposed after damage or loss of license. Others suggest entire barges were commissioned fresh for this use, designed by shipwrights who probably never expected to have to factor pig weight distribution into their blueprints. But the records are spotty, and you can't exactly ask the pigs. What we do know is that this wasn't an isolated oddity. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of these things. Some were large enough to house 30 or 40 pigs, complete with narrow catwalks for workers and removable roofs for better ventilation in summer. Others were more like dinghies of doom, ramshackle rafts with a hog or two squealing through the night. The sheer pragmatism is very Dutch. Just like they reclaimed land with dikes, why not reclaim livestock space from the water? Floating pig palaces were efficient, flexible, and best of all, they could be moved if neighbors complained too much. A swine solution that sails away from civic anger. As you lean on the rail, you feel the boat sway. A barge with too many pigs risks capsizing, and yes, it happened. But that's a story for another section. For now, you're standing in the middle of an architectural compromise between booming pork markets and shrinking city ground. And while you'd assume pigs on boats would be a temporary solution, they stuck around for decades. Long enough to become a normal, if unwanted, part of urban life. Artists ignored them in their idealized canal paintings, but every now and then, a little piggy tail shows up in the corner. A reluctant nod to reality. So here you are, easing back against a hay bale, lulled by the rhythmic squeals and the soft slap of canal water against wooden walls. You're aboard a piece of forgotten infrastructure, an experiment in floating urbanism powered by bacon and poor judgment. And it's just the beginning. You blink slowly, still nestled into the itchy hay, the boat gently swaying under your weight. The pigs are quieter now, mostly chewing, some snoozing, and you take a long, deep breath. Mistake. Yep, still pigs, still canal, still very earthy. But your senses adjust. It's part of the charm now, isn't it? You stretch a bit and glance around. One question floats stubbornly to the front of your sleep-fogged brain. Why pigs? Why boats? Why this whole floating farm thing in the first place? It's not exactly intuitive. Chickens, maybe? Light, portable, not inclined to chew through planks. But pigs? Let's rewind the scene. Amsterdam in the 1600s is a kaleidoscope of wealth and density. Spice-laden ships unload fortunes daily, while the cobbled streets are packed with butchers, bakers, money changers, and imported chaos. There's no room to breathe, let alone raise a decent pig. Yet pork is everywhere. In your stew, in your sausage, in little savory pies with mysterious fillings that you're 99% sure once oinked. Pigs are a city's protein of choice. Fast-growing, omnivorous, and incredibly efficient. They'll eat almost anything, including the garbage people leave behind, which makes them ideal for urban life. Sort of. They clean up scraps, sure, but they also leave their own, generously and frequently. And in a tightly packed city already wrestling with chamber pots and open sewers, adding pigs to the mix feels like an insult to everyone's nostrils. Still, demand is demand. The Dutch are nothing if not clever capitalists. And so, some bright minds decided to innovate. No land? No problem. You've got canals. Hundreds of kilometers of water snaking through neighborhoods. Why not build a barge-style hybrid, load it with pigs, and let it gently float somewhere not too close to rich people? This is where the floating pig palace steps in. Not just a novelty, but a necessity. It's a funky solution to a uniquely Dutch problem. Think of it like Uber for pork. Fluid, adaptable, irritating to the locals, but undeniably convenient. Historians still argue whether this practice evolved organically from fishermen keeping livestock aboard during long hauls, or whether it was a sudden response to rapid population growth. Maybe both, maybe neither. The records, like the pigs, are kind of messy. You wander to the stern where the barge hand, from earlier, let's call him Cohen, because of course he's a Cohen, is crouched over a small box of tools. He's not fixing the boat, he's sharpening a cleaver. No, don't panic. It's not for you. Just part of the cycle. These pigs aren't pets. They're inventory. Cohen tells you in a slow, gravelly voice that his barge carries 22 pigs today. They're rotated every few weeks. He sells them off at the Nordermarkt, buys new piglets upriver, and the cycle continues. He's part farmer, part sailor, part reluctant waste manager. The trick, he mutters, is to keep them just fat enough to fetch a good price, but not so fat they fall through the floorboards. You're not sure if that's a joke or a cautionary tale. With Cohen, it could go either way. Floating pigsties weren't all the same. Some were big enough to walk through like proper barns with hayloft compartments and feed chutes. Our others were little more than glorified rafts with a pig pen nailed on top. Some even had makeshift paddles or sails, though most relied on ropes and poles for movement. You try to picture a pig barge with a sail, cruising proudly down the canal like it's going to war with brunch. One fringe tidbit: there are whispers in old merchant letters of a few deluxe pig barges made for nobles experimenting with eco-friendly meat, before that was even a term. These included tiled interiors and supposedly music boxes to soothe the temperament of the livestock. No, really. Dutch nobles were wild like that. Back to the everyday version. These boats weren't just for show, they worked. They solved a real urban planning problem. Pigs needed space and water was available. And because they floated, they weren't subject to land taxes, which annoyed city officials to no end. A floating pig was, legally speaking, a gray area. Too mobile to regulate, too smelly to ignore. Some pigs were raised to full adulthood aboard these barges. Others were just temporarily housed before being sold or slaughtered. If you squint through the fog, you might spot a smaller barge approaching, stacked high with crates of vegetables and day-old bread. The pig barge's mobile delivery partner. The pigs go wild as Cohen tosses a few moldy cabbages over the rail. Sustainable before it was cool. Still, for all their cleverness, floating pig palaces weren't universally beloved. City records include complaints ranging from unsightly and vulgar to a danger to boat traffic. The worst, of course, was the smell. On hot days when the wind died down and the sun beat mercilessly on wooden planks soaked in, well, pig, the canals became unpleasant in ways that words fail to capture. One diarist from 1683 described it as a stew of filth, most pungent and most permanent. The weird part? No one seriously tried to ban them for decades. Why? Because everyone needed pork. Even the complainers were chewing on sausage rolls while drafting their petitions. You sit now on the edge of the barge watching city life crawl by. You're beginning to understand how Amsterdam operated not just on land and sea, but in the liminal sloshing space between the two. Pig barges were just another cog in the machine. Unpleasant? Definitely. But effective. Cohen finishes feeding the pigs, mutters something about a loose board near the back corner, and disappears below deck. You remain, lulled by the soft grunts and water sounds. You've learned more than you expected about mobile pork solutions, and your brain is just fuzzy enough to let the image stick. You on a boat full of pigs gliding through time. You wake from your pig-induced haze with a straw stuck to your cheek and a low grunt vibrating through the floorboards. The sun is higher now, slicing through the fog and glittering off the canal water like it's trying to distract you from the reality of where you are. But there's no escaping it. You're standing in the middle of a floating pig palace, and now it's time to look closer. Literally. Let's explore how this mess was actually put together. Picture a long, flat-bottomed barge, about 15 to 20 meters in length. It floats low in the water, wide enough for a decent number of pigs, but narrow enough to squeeze under low canal bridges. This is your basic model. Function over flair. The wood groans beneath every step, especially pig steps, which are less than delicate. The construction is sturdy, if not exactly elegant. You edge toward the bow where you spot something that passes for a blueprint, carved roughly into a wood plank, and now doubling as a makeshift cutting board. Some historians believe floating pig palaces were adapted from old cargo barges, especially the types used to haul peat or sand. Others argue they were purpose-built from the keel up, designed specifically for the art of aquatic pig keeping. Historians still argue whether the original models were converted out of necessity or commissioned by entrepreneurial butchers. Either way, someone put serious thought into building a boat for Bacon. You crouch and examine the floorboards. They're slatted, spaced, just wide enough for pig waste to slip through, but not wide enough for a hoof to get caught. Ingenious. Below, the waste collects in a shallow catchment basin, or is, let's be honest, simply flushed into the canal. Sanitation, 17th century style. The pigs, blissfully unaware, go about their business, snorting and digging around the feed troughs. The roof overhead is arched, made from overlapping wooden shingles and tar-coated cloth to keep the rain out. It sags slightly in the middle, a gentle reminder that pigs are heavy and so is time. In winter, this roof might be reinforced with an extra straw for insulation. In summer, flaps could be propped open to allow airflow, which helped with cooling and, more importantly, with the stench. You'd still smell the barge from a block away, but hey, every bit helps. One quirky design detail you notice is the inclusion of a raised central walkway. The pigs don't care for it, they trample it constantly. But for the workers, it's a dry path to move across the deck without wading through whatever ungodly substance pools on either side. It's also a quick escape route if the pigs get feisty, they do that. Some of the larger barges even included a storage hold beneath the main deck, where sacks of feed, barrels of water, and tools were stored. It was accessible by a trapdoor cleverly hidden beneath a hay bale. You lift the bale and peer inside. It's cramped, dark, and smells like fermented oats and despair. You quickly let it drop back into place. Then there's the fencing. Railings line the perimeter of the barge, tall enough to keep the pigs from jumping ship, but open enough to allow a bit of breeze. The wood is worn smooth from years of rubbing snouts and impatient piglets trying to see what lies beyond the rail. Spoiler: more water, a few ducks, and someone's discarded shoe. Some particularly paranoid owners added iron shackles or ropes to tether their most spirited pigs. There's even an old rumor, completely unverified, that one floating pig palace once lost half its cargo when a sudden thunderclap caused a group panic and the pigs collectively dove overboard. If true, it was the loudest, splashiest, bacon-related incident in maritime history. One of the more fringe anecdotes claims that certain pig barges were fitted with lanterns beneath the waterline. Not for aesthetics, but to attract fish at night. The pigs would watch the glow and snort in mild curiosity while the barge hand cast a line or two. Pigs above, fish below. That barge must have smelled like Poseidon's locker room. You continue your self-guided tour and notice a strange contraption hanging on the wall near the feeding area. It looks like a large wooden rake, but with wide flat paddles instead of tines. It's a muck spreader. Cohen uses it to redistribute waste and straw across the deck to avoid slippage. Or, as he mutters, to keep the pigs from ice skating into the canal. It's not elegant, but it works. The water lapping against the sides of the barge is the only soundtrack, aside from the intermittent oinks and the wooden creaks that seem to mimic a slow exhale. You stand there, enveloped by the textures of this crude machine. Wood, straw, iron nails, pig hide, and you realize something important. This thing was designed with intent. Not necessarily compassion, not hygiene, certainly, but intent. A system, a strategy. In a time where land was precious and pork was money, the Pig Palace wasn't just a boat, it was a business model. Historians suspect there were even design competitions at one point. Early prototypes shown off to butchers and merchants like floating concept cars. Mine fits 30 pigs and 2 workers with room for cabbage barrels. Well, mine has a reinforced waste chute and removable side planks. And somewhere in the distance, a city official quietly sobs into his ledger. The engineering wasn't perfect. These barges required constant maintenance. Boards warped, roofs leaked, pigs chewed things they weren't supposed to. But for every issue, there was a patch or a workaround. Some barges even added rudimentary ballast, stones or barrels of sand, to counterbalance the ever-shifting pig weight. That's a sentence you didn't expect to hear tonight. Counterbalance the pig weight. You pause at the edge of the barge and look out over the water. A swan floats by, completely unbothered. You, on the other hand, are now mildly obsessed with how these floating pig palaces actually floated. The average pig weighs upwards of 100 kilograms. Multiply that by 20 or 30, then add feed, water, and workers, and you've got yourself a floating disaster waiting to happen. And yet, it worked. Mostly, until it didn't. But that's for later. For now, you step carefully around a dozing sow, find a semi-clean corner, and ease yourself down again. You rest your head against the railing and close your eyes. You're lying on top of centuries-old problem-solving, where wood met water and pigs went for a ride. Your eyelids flutter open as the gentle thunk of a pole against the canal wall echoes through the quiet morning air. The pig barge has docked. Sort of. It's tied off loosely against a timber piling near a market square. You sit up, blinking at the sudden color and bustle unfolding on shore. The pigs are stirring too, sensing activity. One lets out a yawn that turns into a hiccup. Apparently cabbage burps are real. Now it's time to meet the true engine behind this whole floating pork parade. The people. Sure, Cohen's gruff barge hand. Exterior gives you something to marvel at, but he's just one link in a surprisingly complex web. You're not just on a boat with pigs, you're riding the arteries of an entire pork-based economy. Meet the pigmasters, those enterprising Dutch citizens who turned livestock logistics into an art. They're part sailor, part farmer, part negotiator. Their job doesn't end at feeding pigs or scooping dung, it extends into the back alleys of city markets, where deals are made with fishmongers, bakers, brewers, and soap makers. Yes, soap. Pigs provide lard, and lard makes soap. So even your cleanliness owes a nod to a pig's belly fat. The pigmaster doesn't work alone. He may employ a helper or two, usually a younger relative or a hired hand, paid in crusty bread and blistered palms. These helpers keep the pigs in line, prevent escapes, a real issue. You haven't lived until you've seen a pig cannonball into a canal, and help load and unload supplies. They also learn the ropes, how to barter for feed, how to soothe a pig with a clove-stuffed apple, how to convince a city guard that their barge totally has the right to dock here. Historians still argue whether these floating pig crews operated under formal guilds or just informal networks of trust. Some suggest there was a loosely organized association, something like a barge union, that helped regulate trade and settle disputes. Others think it was all backroom deals, handshakes, and whatever bribes got the job done fastest. One mainstream fact is crystal clear. By the mid-1600s, pork was everywhere in Dutch cuisine. Smoked, salted, stewed, fried, you name it. And it wasn't just for the rich. Pork was the meat of the people. Pigs were cheaper to raise than cattle, easier to feed, and more flexible in how they could be processed. The floating pig barge wasn't just a rural novelty, it was a critical part of food infrastructure. You stretch and step off the barge, walking onto a damp wooden dock that connects to the broader sprawl of the city's market district. It's early, but already a few stalls are popping up like mushrooms. Women with baskets on their hips, boys with wheels of cheese, old men unloading crates of turnips. And off to the side, a few fellow pig. Barges have docked. It's like rush hour for hooved animals. You eavesdrop on a conversation between two barge operators. One's complaining about a thief who stole a whole ham off his deck last night. The other shrugs and says, "At least it wasn't a whole pig again." Apparently, pig theft was a real problem. Some of the animals fetched high prices, especially the marbled fat ones used in luxury dishes. Not all pigs made it to the dinner table in traditional ways. Some were traded alive to remote farms. Others were taken to mobile slaughterhouses. Yes, that was a thing. Set up on docked barges with just enough space for a quick, clean cut and a barrel to catch the aftermath. One scholar even theorized that certain pig barges doubled as covert butchering sites, though evidence is scarce. The smell alone would have made secrecy a challenge. Now let's not forget the pig traders. These folks were the middlemen. brokers who made deals between barge owners and market sellers. They had their own slang, hand signals, and an unshakable sense of smell. You'd see them striding around in wide-brimmed hats and mud-slicked boots, licking fingers to flip parchment contracts and scratching notes on doorframes. They knew exactly which pigs came from which farms, which had been raised on spoiled turnips, and which were fed imported biscuit mash from English ships. That last one supposedly produced pigs with a sweeter flavor. You're not sure if you're intrigued or horrified. One quirky but entirely plausible claim from old market records is that some pig traders held contests for who could guess the weight of a pig to within half a kilo just by looking. The prize? Usually a free cut of meat or a token for the next canal-side tavern. Bragging rights included. You imagine them squinting at a pig's haunch, stroking their chins, and dramatically declaring 78 kilos and not a gram more. All while the pig scratches its rear against a barrel and sneezes on someone's boots. You move through the crowd, absorbing the details. The shouts of bartering, the wet slap of fish on planks, the heavy clunk of hooves on cobblestone. One elderly woman carries a wooden spoon like a scepter, tapping each pig's back and declaring which ones have a good soul. No one argues with her. She might be a butcher's mother, or a witch, or both. Meanwhile, Cohen reappears from the barge, guiding a plump pig toward the market square with a length of rope and an expression of practiced boredom. He tells you this one's already been sold, ordered in advance by a tavern on the East Canal. They like the darker meat, he says. This one's been fed brewer's mash. He pats the pig affectionately, like a man proud of his fermented bacon future. You follow Cohen through a few alleyways, passing graffiti scratched into the walls, crude pig sketches, prayers for rain, and one very enthusiastic ode to pickled herring. The tavern is small, dark, and smells like yeast and wet wood. The innkeeper nods in approval, passes Cohen a small pouch of coins, and offers you a mug of cloudy beer as a thank you for not screaming at the pig gift. As you sip and watch the pig disappear behind the kitchen door, you realize how tightly woven the people of Amsterdam were with the pigs they raised, sold, and ate. These weren't nameless livestock shuffled in from the countryside. These were living cargo, part of a floating system of nourishment and noise, tethered to real lives and real hands. You step back into the morning light. The barge waits quietly in the canal, its remaining pigs dozing in the hay. Cohen's already counting feed bags and mumbling to himself about the next delivery. And you're getting sleepy again. Your belly's warm, the beer's a little too comforting, and the slow ripple of the water calls you back to the barge. You climb aboard and settle into your favorite straw-packed corner, imagining the many hands that kept this whole absurd, brilliant, pig-powered machine running day after day. The barge sways gently beneath you, and somewhere nearby, a pig lets out a sigh that sounds suspiciously human. You peek one eye open and realize you've drifted into a post-market lull. Cohen's disappeared again, probably off arguing over barrel prices or borrowing a ladle, and the pigs are sprawled across the deck like sunbathing tourists. Now's your chance to understand the secret ingredient behind this entire operation. The feed. You shuffle toward a lumpy burlap sack near the stern and untie it. The scent that hits you is complex. A heady blend of grain, rot, and something that smells oddly like licorice. You stick a finger in and prod. Yep, it's feed, all right. But this isn't your run-of-the-mill grain mix. This is 17th century pig cuisine. A Frankenstein's blend of leftovers, imports, and things no human would willingly eat. Mainstream fact? The Dutch were masters of food efficiency. They didn't just feed pigs whatever was convenient. They engineered diets to fatten them faster, plumper, and tastier. Leftover brewery mash, rich in calories, was a favorite. Bakers often sold their stale bread and unsold rolls to pig farmers for a few guilders a sack. The pigs didn't care if it was sour. They were basically walking compost bins. You reach into a second sack. This one's softer, moist even, and smells faintly of herring. Oh no, this is the dreaded fish mash, A fringe delicacy among pigs, but a horror to anyone within sniffing distance. Made from leftover fish guts, crushed bones, and seaweed, it was sometimes added to pig diets for extra protein. The result? Exceptionally fast-growing pigs and deeply unfortunate breath. Historians still argue whether the fish-fed pigs tasted better or worse. Some taverns swore by them, said the meat was richer, saltier, even slightly smoky. Others insisted the flavor was aquatic. One 1672 diary entry describes a roast as having undertones of anchovy and sorrow. You try not to gag at the thought. Despite the questionable aroma, you can't help but admire the logic. In a city like Amsterdam, where every alley emptied into a canal and every kitchen had leftovers, pigs became the city's unofficial recyclers. Spoiled vegetables from market stalls? Toss them in the trough. Wilted cabbage, turnip peels, cheese rinds? Pig food. Even brewers' yeast and apple pulp from cider presses found their way into the feed mix. This wasn't just convenience, it was circular economy before the term even existed. The pigs cleaned up human waste, and in return they became ham. Neat, tidy, and only slightly morally complicated. One quirky tidbit whispered in pig hand circles involves a notorious feed additive called Snellfeet, a rumored blend of molasses, ground acorns, and chalk powder. Supposedly it tricked pigs into gaining water weight before sale. No one's found solid records of it, but the idea of pigs waddling into market like big pink water balloons is too vivid to ignore. Whether it worked or not, the name alone earned it infamy. You pause at a feeding trough and watch one of the pigs methodically bury her snout in a slop pile. She chews with the concentration of a monk reciting prayer. The mix looks like something scraped from the bottom of a stew pot and fermented for fun. There are bits of beetroot, crusts of black bread, and what might be the remains of an onion. You want to gag, but she looks so content, you reconsider. Then there's water, or more precisely, the lack of it. Clean water wasn't always easy to come by. Some barge owners had to haul barrels from designated fountains or wells, careful not to let pigs drink directly from the canal. Too many got sick that way. Others weren't so picky. If it rippled, they drank it. The smarter pig masters developed rain-catching systems using slanted roof flaps and collection barrels. One even built a funnel system that directed morning dew straight into the troughs. Genius or madness? Hard to say. As the pigs finish slurping down breakfast, a light breeze rolls over the canal, carrying the scent of cinnamon from a nearby bakery. You think briefly about cinnamon pork stew, then immediately regret it. Cohen reappears, wiping his hands on a rag that looks more like a painter's drop cloth. "They're eating well," he mutters, nodding toward the now empty troughs. "Means we'll get a good price in Leiden." You raise an eyebrow. Leiden? You hadn't realized you were setting out again. That's right. These barges weren't always static. Many floated between cities, supplying different markets depending on demand. Leiden, Haarlem, Rotterdam, even as far as Delft. The journey could take days depending on current and weather. Pigs, it turns out, were better travelers than you'd expect. They didn't get seasick, they didn't complain, and they were too heavy to run off. You watch as Cohen tightens a few ropes, checks the mast, a stubby pole more symbolic than functional, and signals to a passing rower to help shove off. Soon you're drifting again, the city fading behind you and the pigs settling into their sleepy travel mode. As the water laps against the hull and the horizon broadens, you think about what's really moving this barge forward. Not the current, not even Cohen. It's cabbage peels and stale donuts and barley mash from last week's ale festival. 1,000 invisible hands feeding their waste to these pigs, who convert it into something sellable, chewable, undeniably marketable. You rest your head against a warm patch of wood and close your eyes again, lulled by the rhythm of the waves and the soft, wet snores of well-fed pigs. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the heartbeat of the city echoing in each snort. You wake to the distant toll of a church bell, and the sluggish creak of rope stretching as the barge pulls against the current. The air has changed. It's cooler now, crisper, and smells faintly of marsh grass and chimney smoke. You've left Amsterdam behind, drifting toward the countryside. The pigs, now seasoned travelers, lie sprawled across the deck like hairy luggage. A few grunt contentedly in their sleep. One appears to be dreaming, probably about fermented carrots. As the city slips away, your surroundings shift into something softer, older. The canal narrows between fields that go on for miles, stitched together with hedgerows and sleepy farmhouses. This is where it all begins, where pigs are born, raised, and shaped into the culinary chameleons of the Dutch Golden Age. Cohen stands at the tiller, one hand on a rope, one eye scanning the bank. This stretch belongs to the Van Drevers, he says absently. Old family, they raise pigs like they're royalty. You lean against the railing and watch as a cluster of sows shuffle through a pasture, snouts buried in muddy troughs, tails twitching in slow unison. A teenage boy waves lazily from a gate, a pitchfork balanced across his shoulders like a musketeer on lunch break. Farms like this one were the upstream half of the pig palace equation. They weren't flashy, no marble pig fountains or velvet pens, but they were efficient, practical, and shockingly modern. Pigs were kept in semi-open barns, allowed to roam paddocks, and often raised alongside ducks, chickens, and the occasional goose who thought he was in charge. Mainstream fact? The Dutch were among the first in Europe to develop rotational feeding pens. Instead of cramming pigs into one muddy lot, farmers moved them through a cycle of areas: mud, grass, grain, and waste piles. This kept the pigs healthier and fatter. It also made their manure more valuable, since different areas concentrated different nutrients. Yes, even their poop was organized. You notice a wooden sign carved with an image of a pig standing on a barrel. Cohen snorts. That's Farmer Willem's place. Swears by apple rinds and cabbage cores. His pigs grow slower but taste sweeter. He gives you a sideways glance. Well, according to Willem. Historians still argue whether feed-based flavor differences were real or just 17th century marketing flair. Some scholars claim diet had dramatic effects on the meat's texture and taste, while others suggest most of it was psychological, more about branding than biology. You drift past another farm, this one quieter, more structured. The pigs here are smaller, cleaner, almost dainty. A woman in a bonnet walks between pens, scattering dried peas from a basket. These pigs are what Cohen calls city breeders, not raised for slaughter, but for sale to urban pigmasters. They're leaner, bred for resilience over flavor, the idea being they'll fatten later under someone else's care. It's a piglet supply chain. Think, less bacon, more logistics. As the day stretches out and the wind picks up, Cohen steers the barge into a narrow side canal that snakes through an older part of the countryside. This, he says, is where the truly weird pig operations lived. The fringe farmers, the eccentric breeders, the tinkers and dreamers who tried to push porcine boundaries. One farm, barely visible behind a curtain of weeping willows, boasts a slanted roof covered in moss and a pen made entirely of ship ropes. Cohen whispers, "Old Dirk lives there, claims his pigs can recognize faces." You squint, trying to make out the shadowy shapes behind the rope pen. Sure enough, a few snouts poke out and watch your barge glide past. One even grunts softly, almost thoughtfully. You wave. It doesn't wave back, but you feel watched. Dirk's pigs are famous in local taverns for their calm temperament and unusually glossy skin. One story claims he feeds them boiled barley and reads aloud from maritime law books. Is that real? Who knows? But it's definitely Dutch. Another quirky tidbit surfaces in Cohen's next tale. A farmer named Maetje who once trained her pigs to respond to flute music. Supposedly she would play a specific tune in the mornings, and her pigs would gather near the trough in perfect silence, waiting for food. Cohen shrugs. Might be true. Or maybe they just like the sound of food buckets. Still, you file that image away. A woman serenading her pigs while mist curls over a frostbitten field. By mid-afternoon, the landscape begins to widen again, the field sloping down toward a marshy delta where the pigs graze knee-deep in reeds. These are wetland pigs, a rare breed kept near bogs for their ability to root through swamp vegetation. Their meat is prized in certain circles, especially among the more avant-garde taverns of Rotterdam. You're not sure what they taste like, but they smell faintly of moss and mystery. Cohen ties off the barge along a quiet dock near one of these lowland farms. He tells you it's time to collect a special passenger. A piglet destined for a merchant in Delft who only buys animals born under a full moon. Yes, that's apparently a thing. The merchant believes it makes the meat more tender. Historians scoff at this, but a few folklorists say lunar piglet myths go back to Roman times. You're more concerned that the piglet might start glowing. As the farmer lifts the squealing moon pig aboard, you notice a strange charm tied around its neck. An herb bundle, maybe, or a wad of salt. Protection charm? Anti-piracy amulet? You ask Cohen, but he just shrugs. Some folks believe in sea spirits, safer not to question it. You settle back onto the barge, the new piglet nesting itself in a hay pile beside your foot, occasionally nibbling your bootlace. The sun dips low, casting a golden spill across the canal, and everything slows down. The pigs sleep, the barge drifts. Cohen sings quietly to himself in some old dialect. You only catch every other word, but one phrase stands out. Hui in het hart, vet op het life. Hay in the heart, fat on the body. You realize then that this entire countryside, its quiet farms, its peculiar people, its patient pigs, is the bedrock of the floating palace world. Without these breeders, these feeders, these flute players and face recognizers, the whole system would collapse. Cities could run out of pork, markets would go silent, soup would be very boring. So as you doze off again, the piglet warm beside you and the sky painted in soft violet, you whisper your thanks to the rural world. You may be floating on a barge, but the ground beneath it, the soggy, hay-strewn, pig-printed ground, is what keeps everything afloat. You awaken with a start, not from any sudden noise, but from a feeling, a shift, a kind of intangible hum in the air that whispers, you're getting close. The breeze now carries with it not just the sweet musk of farmland, but something sharper, the warm, slightly sour aroma of commerce. Barrels of pickled herring, stacks of smoked eels, bread baked just a little too long. In the distance, the rooftops of Leiden begin to peek over the reeds like gossiping hens. The pigs know it too. They stir with purpose. One gets up and stretches like a yoga instructor with back problems. Cohen, chewing on what you hope is licorice root, chuckles. They can smell market day. You believe it. There's a distinct energy now, a low-frequency excitement that trembles in your elbows. As you approach Leiden's southern gate by water, the canal narrows and grows more deliberate. Boats crowd in from all directions, some loaded with crates of tulip bulbs, others with barrels of saltfish, and yes, more than a few competing pig barges. Some of the pigs across the way make polite grunts. Others look ready to brawl. You resist the urge to wave. The floating palaces start to line up along the market quay like soldiers in a parade. Painted wooden hulls gleam in the morning light, and some bear carved decorations. Nothing wild, just the occasional curly-tailed figurehead or floral motif. One barge, 3 down from yours, has a miniature windmill perched on the roof. Unnecessary? Absolutely. Adorable? You bet. Cohen signals to a dockhand and swings the barge toward a slotted mooring. The pigs, suddenly cooperative, shuffle toward their feeding stations as if rehearsing a routine. You, however, feel a sudden pang of panic. This is it. The moment they've been raised for. Sold, butchered, turned into stew or sausage or something too poetic to describe before bedtime. Mainstream fact. Leiden's livestock market was one of the most important in the Dutch Republic. famous for its strict guild regulations and its, shall we say, colorful vendors. The Guild of Butchers, for example, required all swine to be examined by a meat inspector. A man with an apron, a ledger, and a disturbingly enthusiastic way of jabbing pigs in the ribs. The idea was to ensure healthy animals, but you suspect it was also a little bit for fun. You follow Cohen onto the quay. The crowd is already thick. Buyers in wool cloaks and feathered hats, fishmongers with permanent scowls, children darting through legs, and then, of course, the pigs themselves. Trotting, snorting, lounging like they own the place. Because in a way they do. Without pigs, half of Leiden wouldn't eat, and the other half wouldn't profit. Cohen sets up a temporary stall. A simple wooden sign, a scale, and a crate of dried apples to keep the pigs distracted while negotiations unfold. Then he leans against a barrel and waits. Selling pigs, it turns out, is a game of patience, posture, and knowing exactly when to insult someone's hat. Buyers approach, sniff the air, prod a pig's flank, and ask extremely specific questions about diet, weight, and recent bowel movements. Cohen answers in short, clipped Dutch, occasionally glancing at you to see if you're taking notes. You are not. You are busy watching a rival vendor attempt to bribe an inspector with a wedge of cheese. Bold move. Doesn't work. Historians still argue whether these markets operated more like auctions or polite negotiations. Some records suggest shouting and jostling, while others describe the pig markets as eerily silent, all gestures and murmurs. You're experiencing the loud version. Someone is yelling about a pig being part goat, and a pair of grandmothers are locked in a bidding war over a very nervous-looking runt. That brings you to a quirky sideline of the Floating Palace era, pig nicknaming. Sellers often gave their pigs names to make them more memorable, and sometimes to emotionally manipulate buyers. You pass one sign that reads, "Gertrude loves children and boiled turnips." Another brags, "Sir Wadlington, calm in thunderstorms." You even spot one called Salty Susan, which frankly raises questions. But the real deal sealer, Cohen tells you, is grooming. Presentation. That's right. Some barge masters brushed and bathed their pigs before market. Not out of kindness, but because a clean pig fetched a better price. Shiny pigs looked healthier. Happy pigs looked tastier. There are even accounts of pigs being rubbed with goose fat to give them a healthy glow. You glance at your barge companions and wonder if you've been traveling with a few divas in disguise. Then, just as things settle into a rhythm, a trumpet blares and a procession appears at the far end of the quay. A man in a wide-brimmed hat and ceremonial cloak, Leiden's market overseer, walks with pompous slowness past the stalls, nodding solemnly at sellers, glaring at loafers, and sniffing dramatically at sausages. Cohen straightens up. Inspection time. The overseer stops in front of your pigs, gestures to one, and jots something in a small notebook. You're unsure if it's good or bad. Then he nods to Cohen, and just like that, the sale can begin. Negotiations kick off in earnest, and within the hour, 4 pigs are sold to a butcher's apprentice from Delft. One is taken by a cheesemonger, for reasons no one fully explains. And your moon pig is purchased by a man in blue velvet, who pays in polished tokens and disappears without a word. Probably off to perform some sort of pork-based ritual. You help Cohen load the remaining pigs back onto the barge. Those not yet sold will journey onward to the next city. As you step over a sleeping sow, you feel a strange tug in your chest. They're not pets. You know that. But still, they've snored beside you, sneezed on your coat, tried to eat your boots. You can't help it. You whisper a goodbye to Gertrude, who may or may not be Sir Wadlington, and she flicks her ear in what you decide is a blessing. As the barge pulls away from Leiden, the market noise fades behind you, replaced once more by the slow hush of open canal and the rhythmic clomp of pig hooves against the deck. You're floating again, lighter somehow. The barge glides onward under a stretch of bruised purple sky, the kind that only appears in northern Europe, where clouds hang low like forgotten laundry and the air always smells a little damp, a little old. The pigs, freshly relieved of a few comrades, are sprawled about in looser clumps now. More room, more hay. Less passive-aggressive grunting. Cohen whistles as he steers a slow, tuneless thing that fits the mood perfectly. You're heading south now, toward Rotterdam. But first, a detour. Because no proper floating pig operation can bypass curing country. That's right. You're drifting into the land of salt, smoke, and pig preservation wizardry. Welcome to the smoky heart of the Dutch meat curing trade. As you pass into a flatter, grayer region, the first thing you notice is the smell. It hits you like a blanket dipped in bacon and campfire. A powerful, clinging aroma that seems to stick to your skin and your soul. This is no coincidence. You're floating through one of the Netherlands' most intense hubs of food preservation, where entire villages smelled permanently like breakfast. Mainstream fact: the Dutch were pioneers of meat preservation, developing refined methods for salting, brining, and smoking pork products to keep them edible for months, sometimes even years on ships, in cellars, and across trade routes as far as Batavia or Brazil. Their cured ham in particular became a coveted export item. The methods varied by region, but most combined sea salt, juniper berries, coriander, and thyme. Lots of thyme. As you dock briefly near a curing shed, an unassuming building with blackened walls and a door that creaks like a protest, you spot your first hanging room. Rows upon rows of pig legs dangle from wooden beams, each one wrapped in cheesecloth and tagged with a wax seal. It's like a chandelier made of ham. The air inside is dense with salt and the faint, metallic tang of iron nails and old wood. A man emerges from the shadows with a long fork and a crooked smile. Cohen greets him like an old friend, or a recurring poker rival. His name is John, and he's what locals call a smoke whisperer. He claims to know when a ham is perfectly cured just by sniffing the breeze. You raise an eyebrow. Cohen shrugs. It works. Quirky tidbit. John doesn't use standard wood for smoking. He burns dried seaweed mixed with pine needles and stale cloves. Swears it gives his hams a briny whisper. Historians still argue whether these unconventional smokes added real flavor depth or simply made for excellent branding stories. Either way, Jan's seaweed hams are sought after all over Europe. Even Pope Urban VIII allegedly received one as a gift. He did not write back. Inside the curing shed, the pigs aren't here in the flesh, but their future selves are everywhere. Cohen explains how barge pigs once sold often took one of three paths: butchered fresh for immediate consumption, rendered into lard, the universal medieval miracle product, or cured for long-haul trade. You glance at the meat hanging above you and realize just how far these pigs will travel. Even after death, they're not done journeying. Outside, John gives you a taste. A single paper-thin slice of something dark and rich, both sweet and salty, with a smoky ghost that lingers in your mouth like a bedtime story you're not supposed to hear. You don't ask what cut it came from. You don't want to know. As the barge pushes back out into the main canal, the scent of smoke lingers, hanging on your clothes and tickling your nose. The pigs snuffle disapprovingly, probably jealous. You offer one a wilted apple. Peace is restored. Then something catches your eye on the bank. A series of narrow sheds painted in stripes and arranged like the keys of a broken piano. Those, Cohen mutters, are the private lockers. Not for coats, for sausages. Specifically for the guild-affiliated sausage masters of the region. Yes, sausage making was that serious. Each stall represents a different sausage artisan or family line, and no one, not even Cohen, dares peek inside without permission. Some of these folks use ancient spice blends that are basically state secrets. You overhear one name, Dirk of the Seven Peppers. Sounds like a Bond villain. Smells like garlic and peppercorns. Cohen explains that some floating pig palaces actually carried mobile curing equipment. Tiny smoke huts built directly onto the barge, complete with chimneys and hooks for hanging sausages as they dried along the canal route. The idea was to offer samples at each port without needing to unload anything. Pork to Go 17th Century Edition. You lean back, imagining it. Barge-bound butchers bobbing through the mist, slicing salami with flair, their chimneys puffing gently like polite volcanoes. One pig snores beside you, curled around a pile of cabbages like a sentry. The canal bends southward, and you can feel Rotterdam pulling at the horizon. As night creeps in again, you pass one final oddity. A boat anchored near the bank. Not quite a barge, not quite a shed. Cohen calls it the trial boat. This apparently is where meat guild officials perform taste tests before approving large shipments. You watch as a group of men, powdered wigs askew, gather around a small fire, knives gleaming, notebooks open. Historians still debate whether these taste trials were legitimate quality control or thinly veiled dinner parties. Some claim it was rigorous inspection. Others say the guild members just liked free snacks and yelling about pepper ratios. Either way, you like the idea of a floating taste tribunal. Justice, served with mustard. As stars bloom overhead and the pigs finally settle into their usual chorus of wheezes and grunts, you realize how astonishing this all is. The pigs you've slept beside aren't just animals. They're units in a massive network of trade, taste, and cultural pride. From rural fields to curing huts, from moonlit piglets to peppery sausages, each one plays a role in a story bigger than itself. You pull your cloak tighter, lay your head against a burlap sack, and watch the smoke from John's curing hut twist upward into the sky like a slow, savory lullaby. The morning creeps in slow and syrup thick, turning the canal into a pane of gold-streaked glass. You stretch, crack your neck, and realize Rotterdam is near. You can feel it in the currents, faster here, busier, more assertive. The air smells less of pigs and fields and more of iron, hemp rope, and ambition. Even the pigs seem unusually alert, blinking at the skyline as though they recognize its jagged outline. Rotterdam in the 1600s is the loud sibling of Dutch cities. Not as refined as Amsterdam, not as scholarly as Leiden, but quick, loud, and full of elbows. It's where pigs turn into money fast, or into stews depending on the urgency of the buyer. And it's also where the real logistical magic begins. Because Rotterdam is a node, a funnel, a kind of pig-shaped bottleneck that sends meat and muscle out into the world. Cohen taps the rudder and murmurs, "Big orders today." You see them as you float past. Longshoremen unloading crates, carts rolling over cobbled streets, flags fluttering from merchant ships docked like patient whales. Rotterdam is a city of movement, and your barge is part of its pulse. Mainstream fact. In the Dutch Golden Age, Rotterdam served as a central redistribution point for agricultural goods, including livestock. From here, pigs could be sold locally, transferred to riverboats heading inland, or, most famously, slaughtered and processed for international shipping. Salted pork barrels from Rotterdam ended up everywhere, in Caribbean colonies, in the holds of VOC merchant ships, and even in remote military outposts where the only consistent comfort was a thick slab of chewy, overcured meat. Today, you're not going to the open-air market. No, Cohen's got something fancier. A direct contract. You dock beside a warehouse that's 3 stories tall and smells like soap and onion peels. A man in striped sleeves and a velvet cap, who introduces himself only as D, greets you with a clipboard and a nod that somehow communicates both trust and deep skepticism. This is Rotterdam's meat brokerage world, where pigs aren't animals, they're data points. Cohen and D go into rapid negotiation mode. Weights, cuts, shipping timelines, guild stamps, tax bribes, which apparently everyone just calls dock sugar, and the ever-important storage temper. That last one means, how sweaty is the warehouse? You step back and let them work. The pigs, sensing the administrative chaos, lie very still, probably trying to stay off the ledger. Quirky tidbit. Rotterdam's butchers used a specific breed of pig trainers called snufflers, usually young boys or very enthusiastic elderly men, who would guide pigs into slaughterhouses using a mix of singing, food trails, and the occasional flute. Yes, like swine-pied pipers. Some snufflers became minor celebrities, with songs written about their efficiency or the rhythmic flair of their guiding chants. You don't see any today, but you do spot a man humming to a pig while shaking a pouch of beans. Close enough. Cohen eventually secures a decent deal. Most of your pigs will be moved to a guild-certified slaughterhouse just north of the canal. From there, some will become ham, others bacon, and one, he says with a mysterious smile, has been reserved by a painter who only works in meat tones. You're not sure if that's real, but you'd absolutely visit that gallery. Historians still argue whether Rotterdam's pig logistics system was more efficient than Amsterdam's. Rotterdam fans point to the city's streamlined shipping infrastructure, while Amsterdam loyalists boast of their guild purity and tighter regulation. The truth? Probably somewhere in between. But Rotterdam definitely wins on noise, smell, and sheer industrial charisma. After the paperwork is signed and the pigs offloaded, most stepping down calmly, one resisting with the force of a minor god, you and Cohen push off again, this time with an empty barge and a curious sense of weightlessness. The barge, freed of its snuffling cargo, floats higher in the water, and the breeze slips past you like a gentle nudge. But it's not over. Not yet. Cohen tells you about what comes next. The barge will head into dry dock for cleaning, repairs, and repainting. Floating pig palaces weren't just slapped together and forgotten. They needed love. Maintenance. The occasional dramatic makeover. In fact, some barge captains hired traveling artists, often failed portraitists or frustrated fresco painters to give their vessels flair. Painted scrollwork, stenciled slogans, elaborate pastoral scenes with pigs lounging in imaginary meadows. Pure propaganda. One famous barge, Cohen says, had a ceiling mural inside the cargo hold depicting St. Anthony, patron saint of pigs, riding a golden sow across the clouds. Bit much, he admits, but people remembered it. You head to a side canal lined with repair docks. Here the pig palaces get scrubbed, patched, and most crucially, disinfected. Disease was the eternal enemy. One sniffle could turn a barge into a floating plague zone, so the hulls were scrubbed with vinegar, lye, even stale beer. Anything with bite. A man with one tooth and several opinions oversees the cleaning. He throws you a rag and a wink. You pretend not to understand him. It works. While Cohen deals with inspections and barge measurements, apparently the new width allowance might mean less hay per pig, which has everyone furious, you wander the repair yard. You see palaces in every state of disrepair, some with cracked floors, others with roof gardens being replanted. Yes, roof gardens. One barge has tiny tulips in boxes, presumably for aesthetics or to calm the pigs during storms. You start to suspect some pigs had better real estate than most people. The wind shifts. You look up and a seagull, bloated and judgmental, soars overhead, drops something wet and unidentifiable, then flaps toward the sea. And suddenly it clicks. Rotterdam wasn't the end of the pig's journey, it was the midpoint. From here, pork became global, shipped out to colonies, embassies, naval outposts, and traders far beyond these misty rivers. The Dutch floating pig palaces weren't just quirky boats. They were the start of a literal supply chain that fed empires, lined pockets, and, if we're being honest, probably gave a few sailors very weird dreams. The pigs are gone, the barge is light, and you feel a strange mixture of pride and melancholy. You shared something here. You saw the full cycle, from starlit piglets to meat markets to mural-worthy ham. As night falls again, you curl up on the hayless deck, watching the yard lanterns flicker in the wind. There's a quiet now that feels almost sacred. Tomorrow, the next generation of pigs will climb aboard. You wake to a chill mist threading through the docks, the kind that seeps under your collar and clings like a secret. The barge lies quiet, but the world around you hums with preparation. Today isn't about pigs or hams, it's about the future. The craftsmen and engineers who built, maintained, and sometimes pampered these floating palaces. As you step off the barge, the smell shifts. wood shavings, boiled pitch, and something faintly metallic. You're in the shipwright's quarter, a noisy, messy hub of sawdust and shouting, where carpenters, blacksmiths, and rope makers work side by side, turning raw materials into vessels strong enough to carry the weight of 100 snorting pigs. Mainstream fact: 17th century Dutch shipbuilding was an art form and a science, combining centuries-old techniques with innovations like standardized timber sizes and modular construction. This approach sped up repairs and allowed for specialized barges like your floating pig palaces, boats built not just for sailing but optimized for live cargo. Cohen introduces you to Hendrik, a broad-shouldered shipwright with a grin that seems permanently etched in sawdust. Hendrik runs a crew specializing in barge hull maintenance and tells you about the unique challenges of floating pig palaces. "You can't just build a boat and call it a day," he says. "Pigs move, they grunt, they scratch. That means your floors get slippery, your partitions get battered, and your hull, well, it gets a certain aroma." He laughs, a deep sound like wood cracking. "We use special oak, packed tight and treated with tar made from pine resin. Keeps the water out and the smell mostly in." Quirky tidbit: some barges had removable pig partitions lined with moss and straw to absorb moisture and cushion the animals. But the moss had a nasty habit of harboring tiny insects, tiny flying nuisances the pig handlers called snorkers. Hendrik tells you that snorkers were so hated they inspired a bawdy sea shanty involving a pig, a captain, and a very confused parrot. Unfortunately, the lyrics are lost, but you get the gist. You watch as Hendrik's crew works on a barge hull, scraping algae from the waterline with long, curved knives. One apprentice slips on the slick wood and almost falls, earning a chorus of hoots and mock sympathy. You feel oddly at home amid the chaos. Historians still argue whether the Dutch barge construction techniques influenced other European shipyards or evolved independently from broader maritime trends. Some say Dutch engineers borrowed from Spanish galleon designs. Others suggest they invented innovations locally out of necessity. Either way, their pig palace barges were uniquely adapted to their watery landscape. Hendrik shows you a pile of fresh tar-soaked ropes and explains how they're used not only to secure cargo, but also as makeshift pig toys. Pigs, it seems, enjoy tugging and chewing on these ropes, which helps calm them during long journeys. You picture a gang of bored pigs gnawing on ropes like oversized puppies. It's surprisingly cute. As the sun rises higher, a blacksmith nearby hammers glowing iron, the sparks flying like tiny fireflies. He's forging pig hooks and gate latches, small but critical parts that keep the pig pens secure on the barge deck. The smith tells you he once made a custom latch for a captain who wanted a pig-proof lock because a particularly clever sow kept escaping mid-trip. The story has been exaggerated into legend, but it speaks to the everyday ingenuity around these barges. You notice other trades nearby: rope makers spinning hemp into thick cords, sail makers patching canvas, and coopers bending wood to make barrels for salt and pork fat. It's a symphony of craftsmanship, each note essential to keeping the pig supply chain afloat. At midday, Hendrik invites you into a small workshop filled with models and blueprints. There you see detailed sketches of floating pig palace interiors, compartments for different pig ages, ventilation shafts designed to circulate fresh air, and drainage systems to keep things from getting too swampy. The designs are elegant, almost architectural poems written in wood and rope. One drawing shows a revolving pen concept, a circular rotating pig enclosure meant to keep the animals moving gently and prevent crowding. It never went into production, too complex and expensive, but the idea reveals the level of thought that went into these vessels. You realize the floating pig palaces were more than just transport. They were mobile microhabitats engineered with care, combining practicality and animal welfare in ways that still surprise modern historians. As the afternoon wears on, Hendrik shows you the barge's newly repaired section, a glossy patch of oak freshly tarred, smelling faintly of pine and smoke. You run your hand over the wood, feeling the rough grain beneath your fingers and the subtle warmth from the sun. You pause, listening to the sounds around you. The rhythmic pounding of the blacksmith, the creaking of timbers, the distant barking of dogs, and the occasional piglet squeal carried on the breeze. It's a world in motion, a living ecosystem of people, animals, and machines. You think about the pigs on the barge, the floating palaces themselves, and the human hands that keep everything moving forward. Hands that built, repaired, soothed, and fed. The floating pig palace is not just a vessel or a market, but a symbol of a vibrant, interconnected world that thrived on innovation and resilience. You settle onto a wooden bench, tired but content, and watch a group of apprentices practice hammering nails with practiced, uneven strokes. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the shipyard, and you find yourself humming the tune of the lost Snorker shanty. The evening stretches long and slow, shadows weaving between warehouses like lazy ghosts. You wander toward the edge of the dock where the floating pig palace once birthed. Now stripped down for the night, its wooden bones silhouetted against the fiery orange sky. The smell of tar and wood smoke lingers, mingling with distant scents of fish and brine. A soft breeze brings the faintest notes of laughter and music from the taverns nearby, and you realize something. Life here isn't just about pigs and commerce, it's about community. The floating pig palaces weren't just transport vessels, they were part of a social fabric that connected farmers, merchants, sailors, craftsmen, and tavern keepers in an intricate dance of dependence and celebration. Mainstream fact: the Dutch Golden Age saw a boom not only in trade, but in social clubs and guilds that governed professions, trades, and even culinary arts. These guilds provided support networks, enforced quality standards, and hosted festive events, sometimes with pork dishes front and center. You find yourself drawn to a lively tavern painted with bright blues and reds, its sign swinging in the wind like a promise. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, cider, and the sharp tang of pickled vegetables. The crowd is a mix of rough sailors, sharp-eyed merchants, and grinning craftsmen. You sit at the bar, and an elderly man with a pipe beckons you over. He introduces himself as Willem, a retired pig handler who once worked the floating pig palaces. His eyes sparkle with stories. "You know," he says, "those boats weren't just work. They were home. The pigs, the crew, the merchants. We all shared that space. It was cramped, but it was family." Quirky tidbit. Willem swears that the floating pig palaces inspired a secret tavern game called Porker's Bluff, where players wagered on which pig would grunt first during a long journey. The game's rules were simple, the stakes were high, and the punishments for losing often involved an extra mug of ale or a chorus of pig noises. Historians still debate whether Porker's Bluff was a widespread pastime or just a tall tale spun in tavern smoke. You lean in, asking about the crew life. Willem chuckles and describes how pigs influenced daily rhythms, feeding times, cleaning schedules, even the timing of rest breaks. "You got used to their sounds," he says. "Grunts, snuffles, the occasional snort. They became part of your day like clockwork." At one point, the conversation drifts to pig-related superstitions. Willem mentions the pig's luck, a belief that if a pig snorted near the prow just before leaving port, the journey would be smooth and profitable. Conversely, a silent pig meant trouble ahead. Many crews took these signs seriously, even consulting local fortune tellers before departure. Historians still argue whether these beliefs influenced actual trade practices or were just ways to cope with the unpredictability of river voyages. Regardless, superstition added flavor to the already rich culture surrounding the floating pig palaces. As the night deepens, you watch as Willem and others share old songs and jokes, some about pigs escaping at the worst moments, others about merchants negotiating with a mix of charm and stubbornness. The tavern feels like a living archive, a place where history breathes through laughter and ale. Before you leave, Willem presses a small wooden token into your hand, carved with a pig silhouette and a cryptic motto in Dutch. for luck, he says, and to remember the floating pig palaces. You tuck it away, feeling the weight of stories past and the warmth of newfound friendship. Outside, the night sky is clear and filled with stars. The city's hum softened to a distant murmur. The floating pig palaces may have moved on, but their echoes remain. In wood, in stories, and in the quiet heartbeats of those who lived among them. You stroll back to the barge, the wooden token a comforting weight in your pocket, and settle in for the night. Tomorrow promises new chapters, new journeys, and maybe, just maybe, a few more pigtails. The sun rises soft and golden over the canal, spilling light across the worn wooden deck of your barge. You sip lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste grounding you after last night's tavern tales. The city hums awake. Bells ring, footsteps echo, and somewhere nearby, a rooster asserts its authority. It's another day, and the floating pig palaces are stirring back to life. Today, Cohen mentions, you'll visit the inland markets where pigs, freshly offloaded, meet their next fate. Unlike the bustling port of Rotterdam, these markets have a rhythm that's slower, more deliberate, and deeply rooted in tradition. Mainstream fact: Dutch inland livestock markets were vital for distributing animals across the countryside into smaller towns. These markets were carefully regulated by guilds to ensure fair pricing, animal welfare, and to prevent disease spread. Many towns had annual pig fairs, turning livestock trade into festivals. As you approach the town, the scent shifts again, from salt and tar to earth and fresh hay. The market square is wide and cobbled, ringed with timber-framed shops and filled with the low murmur of bargaining voices and the occasional pig grunt. You step into the market swirl where farmers, butchers, and traders jostle, each trying to read the subtle signals in a pig's stance, snort, or tail curl. You see the clever traders using ancient tricks, like tapping pig jaws or counting teeth, to assess age and health. The whole scene feels like a living chessboard, with pigs as the most important pieces. Quirky tidbit. At one famous market, farmers wore pig masks during auctions to speak the pig's language and bring good luck. While some think this was a theatrical tradition, others argue it helped calm the animals. Historians still debate whether the pig masks were common or rare spectacles, but either way, they add a delightful layer to the story. You notice children darting between stalls, eyes wide with excitement, and hands sticky from sweets sold by the market's bakers. The air smells of fresh bread, apples, and something unexpectedly floral: wild herbs used in traditional pig feed. You meet Peter, a seasoned butcher with hands roughened by years of knife work and a smile that suggests he's seen everything a pig market can offer. Peter explains how the timing of pig sales was crucial. Selling too early meant lower prices, but waiting too long risked the animals growing too old or sick. He shares a favorite story about a pig named Old Snuffles, who famously refused to leave the market, hiding beneath carts and causing a half-day's delay. Old Snuffles became a local legend, inspiring songs and even a painted sign above Peter's shop. Historians still argue whether these markets were more about commerce or community bonding. Some see them as cold economic hubs, while others highlight their role in reinforcing social ties and local identities. As the day wears on, you watch traders measure pigs with wooden rulers and note their weights on parchment. The scene is a blend of precision and tradition, with the occasional burst of laughter or a well-timed jest. You realize the markets were as much about human connection as they were about livestock. The sun dips low, casting long shadows over the cobblestones. Farmers begin loading pigs onto carts for the journey home or to distant buyers. The air cools and the market quiets to a gentle murmur. You wander to a nearby inn, where the day's events will be discussed over mugs of ale and plates of smoked pork. The innkeeper offers you a seat by the fire and a slice of a curious dish, a kind of pig's ear terrine spiced with wild garlic. You take a bite, the flavors mingling strangely familiar with the day's sights and sounds. The floating pig palaces, the shipyards, the bustling port, they all feel connected now, threads in a vast tapestry woven by time and trade. As you rest, you reflect on the pig's journey, from field to barge through ports and markets carried by hands and hearts. The floating pig palaces were more than vessels. They were vessels of culture, economy, and human stories. Outside, the stars begin to twinkle and the town settles into quiet slumber. You close your eyes, the markets hum fading gently, and drift toward dreams filled with snuffling pigs and wooden barges gliding through moonlit waters. Night's velvet curtain has barely lifted when you find yourself back aboard the floating pig palace. The wooden deck cool beneath your feet, and the gentle slap of water against the hull, a steady lullaby. The canal's surface reflects lantern light, shimmering like a pool of stars disturbed by the barge's slow progress. Tonight, the focus shifts inward, to the people who lived and worked on these floating pig palaces, their daily lives unfolding amid the clatter of hooves and the low murmur of pigs settling down. Mainstream fact: life aboard these barges was tough but structured. Crews often numbered between a dozen and 20, including pig handlers, boatmen, and sometimes cooks. They faced cramped quarters, long hours, and the constant challenge of maintaining order among their live cargo. You slip inside the crew's quarters, a modest cabin lined with hammocks and rough wooden benches. The scent of damp wool and salted pork lingers, mixed with something faintly medicinal, herbs meant to ward off disease and keep spirits up. You hear the soft murmurs of crew members sharing stories or humming sea shanties adapted for river life. Quirky tidbit: some crews developed unique rituals to keep morale high, including pig poetry nights, where verses were crafted celebrating the quirks of their porcine passengers. One favorite was a limerick about a pig named Garrett, who snorted the sails into tatters, much to the crew's amusement. You watch a young handler, Marika, tend to the pigs with quiet care, her hands moving deftly to clean pens and soothe restless animals. She explains how the pigs' behavior often mirrored the mood of the crew. Calm animals meant calm journeys, while agitated pigs foretold storms or rough waters ahead. Historians still debate the extent to which animal psychology influenced barge management. Some argue that handlers developed early forms of animal behavior understanding, while others believe practical experience alone guided their methods. Marika shares her secret: a mix of crushed herbs and water sprayed lightly over the pigs, a scent blend she claims helps keep the animals relaxed. It's a recipe passed down through generations, a blend of sage, lavender, and something she calls river mint. You sit with the crew as the night deepens, the barge rocking gently. Stories flow freely, tales of pigs who escaped at the worst times, mysterious noises heard on foggy nights, and even ghost stories about haunted barges haunted by pig spirits, said to appear when a voyage was doomed. One older crew member tells you about the Great Snout Escape, when a particularly clever sow managed to wriggle through a hatch and caused havoc across the docks, inspiring both panic and laughter. These tales serve as bonding rituals, weaving the crew into a tight-knit family amid the challenges of life afloat. You sense the layers of tradition, superstition, and camaraderie that sustain these workers in a harsh, unpredictable environment. Outside, the water whispers secrets as the barge slips through narrow canals and past moonlit fields. You lie back on a hammock, feeling the steady rhythm of wood against water, the gentle snorts of pigs nearby, and the soft voices of the crew fading into dreams. The floating pig palaces were not just vessels, they were floating homes, communities adrift yet anchored by shared experience and resilience. As sleep pulls you under, you carry with you the echoes of pig poetry, the scent of river mint, and the steady heartbeat of a life lived between earth and water. The dawn light filters softly through the mist, painting the canal in pale shades of silver and blue. You're back on deck, where the morning chill is thick enough to bite at your cheeks. The floating pig palace is stirring once again, but today something feels different. A quiet anticipation, a sense of nearing the end of a long journey. The riverbanks blur past in slow motion as you reflect on the long voyage these barges made, from the bustling ports to the inland markets, carrying their living cargo with a mix of skill, care, and a touch of chaos. Mainstream fact: the Dutch waterways were arteries of commerce, connecting cities and countryside with a complex network of canals and rivers. Floating pig palaces were a crucial part of this system, enabling efficient livestock transport in an era before railroads. You notice the subtle changes in the barge's structure, the worn planks, patched tar, and the ever-present moss creeping along the waterline. These details tell stories of countless trips, rough weather, and the ingenuity required to keep the vessels seaworthy. Quirky tidbit. Some barge captains personalize their floating pig palaces with carved figureheads, often depicting pigs or other animals, believed to bring good fortune and protect against river spirits. One famous barge bore a pig with wings, a cheeky nod to the phrase, "when pigs fly," and a hopeful talisman for safe passage. Historians still debate how widespread this practice was, but the idea adds a charming layer to the lore. You stroll along the deck, watching handlers check the pens, their movements practiced and steady. The pigs are quieter now, perhaps tired from the journey or sensing the calm of nearing land. Nearby, you spot a small wooden box filled with carved wooden pig tokens, good luck charms handed out by the crew to merchants and buyers. You pick one up, its smooth surface worn by countless hands, feeling connected to a tradition that spans centuries. The day moves slowly toward the final destination, a port town where the pigs will be sold, their journeys continuing in new forms. You hear the distant clatter of hooves and the murmur of a crowd gathering at the docks. As the barge eases into the harbor, you watch the intricate dance of unloading. Pigs led carefully down ramps, traders haggling over prices, and the hustle of carts ready to carry the animals onward. Historians still debate how much these floating pig palaces influenced animal welfare practices. Some argue they set early standards for humane transport, while others contend economic pressures often outweighed care. You meet a merchant named Annika, who speaks warmly of the floating pig palaces and the trust they inspired. "These barges were our promise," she says. "We knew the pigs would arrive alive and strong, or ready to feed families and keep markets bustling." You notice a few younger buyers wearing pig masks, echoing the market tradition you learned about earlier. It feels like a circle closing, a tradition reborn. As the sun sets, you stand on the dock, the last light shimmering over water and wood. The floating pig palace has fulfilled its mission, a silent witness to the passage of time and tides. You carry with you the smells, sounds, and stories, the grunts, the laughter, the creak of timbers, and the knowledge that these vessels were more than cargo carriers. They were floating chapters in a living history. You take a deep breath, the cool air filling your lungs, and prepare for the final night aboard, knowing that tomorrow brings a gentle farewell. Night drapes itself gently over the harbor, softening the edges of the day's final bustle. The floating pig palace rests quietly now, its wooden frame cradled by the calm water like a cradle rocking a newborn to sleep. You settle on the deck, the cool night air wrapping around you, carrying whispers of past voyages and countless pig grunts fading into the night. The stars shimmer overhead, distant and steady, a silent audience to the centuries of stories woven into this floating home. Tonight you reflect on everything. The pig palaces gliding through canals, the spirited markets bursting with life, the crew's camaraderie and superstitions, and the simple, stubborn pigs that inspired legends and laughter. Mainstream fact: by the late 1600s, advances in canal engineering and river transport had made the Dutch Republic one of the most connected and prosperous regions in Europe. The floating pig palaces were symbols of that success, marvels of design and social cooperation. Quirky tidbit: some sailors believed that the pigs on these barges had a sixth sense about weather. If the pigs huddled close or refused their feed, it was taken as a warning sign of storms ahead. Whether folklore or early meteorology, these beliefs highlight how deeply humans and animals shared fate on these journeys. Historians still argue about the lasting cultural impact of floating pig palaces. Were they simply practical vessels, or did they shape social and economic networks in ways we're only beginning to understand? You think about how these floating homes bore witness to the quiet resilience of human lives tied to waterways, animals, and tradition. You remember Willem's pig token charm, Marika's herbal sprays, Piter's stories and Annika's warm smile at the market. The world has changed, but the echoes remain in waterways, in taverns, and in the very air you breathe here tonight. You lie back, the wooden deck firm beneath you, and let your thoughts drift like the gentle current. The snuffles and grunts around you blend with the soft rhythm of water lapping, a lullaby as old as the rivers themselves. This is the end of the journey, but the story, like the water, flows on, endless and peaceful. Now, dim the lights a little more, breathe in slow and steady, and let your mind sail gently into dreams filled with floating pig palaces and the soft murmur of Dutch canals. The night deepens and your breath slows. Imagine the wooden barge rocking softly with the gentle waves, the faint snuffling of pigs nearby blending with the water's gentle lapping. Let the history you've heard settle like a quiet mist, wrapping you in a warm, soft embrace. In this peaceful moment, know that every story you carry is a thread in the vast tapestry of human life. Stories of trade, laughter, perseverance, and the curious bond between people and animals. The floating pig palaces remind us that even the most practical things can hold magic and meaning. So, as your eyelids grow heavy and your mind drifts towards sleep, rest easy knowing you've traveled through a world both strange and familiar, where history flows as gently as the canals beneath your feet. Good night and sweet dreams.